Take your Bibles and turn, if you would please, to 1 Kings chapter 18. I think we've made the... Okay, 1 Kings chapter 18. This week, we're continuing the study we began last week, confronting truth to power. And this is the story here of when the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, were with King Ahab, who was very wicked, and his wife Jezebel, very, very wicked also. And here we have in chapter 18 the confronting of this wicked king by the prophet of God. And we talked about that and began it last week. We began with an illustration last week of two questions. One was, where would we be as Christians, speaking truth to power, if we lived during the 1776 era? Would you be a loyalist to the crown, or would you be one of the guys taking up arms against the crown? And those are the two groups that at that time. And so what would be the Christian response to that? And then we asked the second question: if you were with Brother Bonhoeffer in World War II, towards the end of World War II, would you be a part of those making the conspiracy to eliminate Adolf Hitler? Would that have been a right thing to do? So that's a question. We're going to try to come back to that tonight if we have time. And if not, we'll come back to it for sure next week, but we'll hopefully have time tonight to come back to it, okay? So you have your outline in the back of your thing. Just a very quick review. Last week we talked about the starting point, which is confronting power is not easy or simple. It's not. If you're married, you know that's not true when it comes to your spouse. If you work someplace, you know it's not true there. But yet confronting power is needed at times. And holding power accountable is in fact a biblical concept within certain parameters, okay? And now we're talking about this in our Sunday school class, so I don't want to overlap there too much, but we'll move on, okay? So this was the area we're talking about. Remember what happened was that the prophet of God comes to Ahab and says, it's not going to rain for 3 years. And actually for 3.5 years it didn't rain. So this is the capital right here. It's not going to rain here, okay? It didn't say it's not going to rain everywhere. It's not going to rain in this area here, okay? And it's spread out actually to a larger area here. And so the prophet first goes over here to, God meets his need there, but then he travels up here after the brook dries up to this with a widow woman, and he stays the rest of the time up there. Now between here and here is more like between here in Norfolk or Williamsburg, not here in Chicago. So that's the different, the time, the space thing, okay? So what's going to happen is the king's been looking for him. We learned this last week, and yet he hasn't been able to find him. And so now God has told him to come to the prophet, to come back to Ahab and to confront him. And that's where we are right now. Now last week we talked about, number one, that when we have this happen, it's important that we conform to God's leadership. We found that in verse 15. Okay, look at verse 15. And Elijah, that's the prophet of God that God is using. As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. So we learned from that passage, we talked about this, that God, he was directed by God and he was enabled by God. That God, in fact, was working in his life. Okay. But now we're going to move to the second point. This is where we ended last week, so we're hurrying through the introduction just to remind you what we talked about last week. But here's where we are this week, okay? Number two, we have to confront wrong thinking. When we speak truth to power, we have to confront wrong thinking. One of the books I'm working through right now talks about life in different aspects of life. It's actually a humanistic book with a tenth of Christianity thrown in. But it's interesting to hear people who are not thinking biblically accurate. It helps me to hear them reason things out, so that way I can help pick up on their false reasoning, and it helps me, tunes me to be able to detect false thinking and wrong thinking. So anyhow, but in this one illustration he made, he shared was this, that about 25 or 30% of everybody who in the day who gets a prescription from the doctor, about 25 or 30% don't fill it or don't pick it up. They go to the doctor. According to this author, he's a psychiatrist, he said about 30% don't pick it up. And of those who pick it up, only about half of them take it like they're supposed to. And so he was questioning, just talking about people making choices, okay? Because people, and you think, well, why would they not take it if they had an issue that moved them to go to the doctor? And there are many reasons for this, okay? But that be that as it may. But people often struggle in thinking correctly. Now watch this, okay? Look at verse 17 and 18. And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? Now what is he doing here, okay? He is the one in sin is saying to the one who is righteous, you're the problem. Okay? Now I'm not drawing a parallel at all, so don't take it this way, okay? But if you hear the news article, who are the problem people in Canada right now? The truckers. Now maybe they are. I'm not getting into that. I'm not going to debate that with you. That's not the point of it. But that's how it is conveyed. Is it not? It is. Back, if you're like really old and you remember back to the 60s and 60s particularly, and 70s, and you remember a lot of the protesting, particularly the 60s, okay? And when some of the stuff they were protesting was some pretty bad stuff. But then the news, what's the problem? The problem is the protesters. Well, sometimes it is the protesters, but sometimes it might be what they're protesting against. Okay? Maybe. But here, okay, here, he is not thinking correctly. Now watch this, okay? Remember this, okay? There is, write this down. Accuracy and accusations do not always abide in the same place. People, you're accused of something, doesn't mean it's accurate. You might be accused and it's not accurate. Here, it wasn't accurate. Notice this, first of all, the problem is not the consequence of sin, and that's what he was about. Ahab was saying, you're the one why it's not raining. So you're the problem. And the king, the one in authority, was obsessed with the fact that his agenda was being interrupted. His economic plan, okay, for the last 3 years, his economic model plan has gone sideways, and there's no amount of raising interest rates or lowering interest rates or messing with prices that are going to solve a problem. There's no water. The drought's going on. And by the way, why was there a drought? There were 2 reasons why there was a drought. Elijah prayed, and God commanded it. Elijah had a vested part in it not raining. Remember that when you think about your prayer time next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. There are things that God will only do. Let me rephrase it. There are things that God wants to do that in order for him to accomplish it, he plans for us to pray. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Do not succumb to the thinking, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Doesn't matter if I pray or not next week. Your life could be different Thursday morning in certain areas, or something could be completely different Thursday morning because you prayed Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Now, you're going to be careful, okay? Because I've had this question before. Well, it didn't work. I went with all the food, all that misery, and all that, and I prayed, and I don't feel anything, and nothing really, there was nothing like awesome happened. And I said, well, you missed the point, okay? That's not the point. Because it is we were trying to fulfill God's will. And God tells us to pray, and there are multiple examples in the Scripture. We're not commanded to fast. No, we're not commanded to fast, but we are encouraged to fast. Jesus says, for example, to his disciples, there are some things that in order to be accomplished requires prayer and fasting. That's what Jesus said. And when you see the New Testament example throughout the life of the Apostle Paul in the first century church, they fasted and prayed. And as a church, they fasted and prayed and got direction to send off the missionaries in the first missionary trip. So the point is that it's important. But this guy is not, he's not thinking right. Now watch this. The problem is not the consequence of sin. The problem is the presence of sin. Okay? Look at verse 18. And he, the prophet, said, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, that ye have forsaken the commandment of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. So the problem is you. Okay? Now listen to me. People in authority who are not right with God are not right in their thinking. Because nobody who's not right with God is right in his or her thinking. There's some deficiency in their thinking. For example, freedom of choice. What does that mean? That means a woman can kill her baby. But think about how nonsensical it is even to use that phraseology, freedom of choice, because certainly the baby has no choice. The baby is not consulted. The father has no choice. And for all of us older people, the grandparents have no choice. I mean, I see Ada and Luca tonight. Thank God that they're parents that, I'm just saying, I mean, that's what you're talking about. When you abort somebody, you're talking about aborting a Luca and an Ada, and you all have your own kids and grandkids, whatever. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. It is so distorted. It is so unreasonable, besides being morally perverted and awful and terrible, that we have a country where the most dangerous place for a baby to be in our country, as far as health concerns, is not in the playground, with or without masks. That's not the most dangerous. The most dangerous place is to be inside their mother's womb. Because more babies die there than any of that. That's the most dangerous place to be. That's just wicked thinking. And so here's you have to understand, and watch this. They give you a reference to write down. 2 Samuel 12, verses 5 through 7. In that passage, Nathan comes to David to confront him, and he gives him a story. And David's reaction in verses 5 and 6 is unwise, unwarranted. Because people who are guilty of sin, have a guilty conscience, they're not thinking correctly. Okay? Now, number 3, okay? Clarify the choice. Okay? Look at verse 21. Okay? And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Okay? Understand this, my friend. When it comes to leadership doing sinful stuff, that the choice is going to be clarified. Letter A, compromise is not sustainable for the child of God. The word halt there, how long halt you between two opinions? The word halt means dance around. How long are you going to dance around this? I mean, if it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And we're not talking about, well, I don't believe in paying money to bring sand from the water into the beach nourishment. I don't think I support that, or I don't support the playground over here. I'm not talking about those kinds. We're talking about right and wrong issues. We're talking about is right and wrong. And when this leader got off into sin, the choice was clear. You cannot maintain hypocrisy. You cannot maintain compromise. And second, truth is non-negotiable. Often you hear this, do you not? People who have biblical views of morality are called what? Homophobic, anti-women, all kinds of weird things, okay? But the reality is, the only people that really love homosexuals are people with a biblical view of homosexuality. They're the only ones that. Recently, there's a bill someplace being talked about, and it basically said that had to be age-appropriate discussion with children about sexuality in the elementary school. And the highest position of authority in Washington said how wrong that was. But that's just not right. I mean, because see, if you do anything to promote a biblical view of morality, you're considered the problem. But you can't negotiate on those things. We can't negotiate on those things. We won't negotiate on those things because the Bible's clear about it. You say, well, it's going to cost you your YouTube channel. It's going to cost you your Facebook thing. Well, if it does, it does. So it costs you your tax-deductible status, which probably eventually it will. Okay? Because we get classified as an unhealthy part of the society, because we are hurting society's mental health by teaching the truth, then that happens, it happens. But the fact is, you can't compromise. Remember this, okay? Elijah does not, verses 30 and 31 haven't been written yet. So he's trusting God, but he is making clear the choices. And we have to do that with our young people. And you do realize this, the only reason why, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why that today pastors and youth workers and Sunday school teachers and godly parents have to talk about things that when many of us were growing up, it was never talked about. Because when we were growing up, the society in which we grew up in all agreed that that was perversion or wrong or nonsensical. And when everybody agrees to it, you don't have to talk about it, okay? Like we don't have to debate which way is east, which way is west, which way is north, because those things are set. And when you live in a society where those things are set, you don't talk about it. But when you live in a society that has gone like in warp speed in the last 20 years off the cliff of reasonableness and intelligent thought and biblical perspective, if you don't teach the kids, they're not going to learn. And they're going to get sucked into it. And well, why about the adults? Because studies show that 20 to 50-year-old people who claim to be born-again Christians have a weaker stand on these major biblical issues that are current today than they did 5 years ago. Because they're just buying into the hook, line, and sinker. Well, it's not that big a deal. Not that big an issue. All right? So, you have to make sure that you clarify the choices. Then he communicates the truth. This is what it became in verses 23 down to verse 38. Now, we're not going to read all of that, but look at verse 22. And Elijah said unto the people, even I only remain a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 400. Now, he's speaking not of what is actually true, but of what is true right at that point. He's there, and the 400 prophets is 1 to 400. That's the ratio right now. He's the only one standing publicly for Christ. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it in wood, and put no fire under it. And I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire under it. And call ye on the name of your God, small g, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God that answers by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. So what he's going to do now, he's going to communicate the truth of the word by doing 2 things. First of all, he is going to unmask the deception, and he is going to reveal the truth. What happens here, as you know the story, that they do that, and the prophets of Baal do it for hours. And they cut themselves, and they do all this elaborate stuff, and nothing happens. So what does Elijah do? He takes his bullock, and now water is precious, and it really is an interesting thing, okay? Look at verse 27. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is on a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth, and must be awakened. He is confronting their sinfulness. And when we have to stand for righteousness against sin, we have to be clear. Now, it is true. If a person chooses to do sinful stuff, they choose to do sinful stuff. But it's not true as a Christian that we can say, well, this is what I believe, whatever you believe is fine. It's not fine. Whatever you want to do is fine. It's not fine. It's not optional. Righteousness, now the Sunday when we deal with chapters 14 and 15, particularly 14 Sunday morning, particularly 14, the last part of chapter 14 of Revelation, righteousness is not optional. Sin is never going to be accommodated by God. Do you think it's a weird thing? Why do we have so many children growing up with one parent in the home? Why is that? You say, well, just what changed? What changed in the society when something changed? What changed? Was our acceptance of lies. Because when you start accepting lies and compromising, and deception becomes permissible in your thinking, there is no limit to how far it will take you. So it will always take you further than you want to go, and keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to spend. Now watch this, verse 28. And they cried aloud and cut themselves. Okay, verse 29. And it came to pass, in midday it was past, that prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, and nothing happens. Now verse 30. And Elijah comes on the scene now. And come near unto me. And all the people came near. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes, reminding them of the truth of God's heritage. Verse 32, and with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar. And then in verse 33, and he put the wood in order, and cut the bullock in pieces, and laid it on the wood, and filled 4 barrels with water, and poured it. This is very valuable stuff. So he saturates it with water. Why? Because while he's unmasking the deception of these false gods. The reason why in love it is so disgusting and revolting and offensive when churches who claim to be churches have rainbow flags. Why is that so disruptive, disgusting? Because they are accepting the deception and exposing people and confirming them and encouraging them to stay in the bondage of sin. They're giving them no hope. And Elijah wants to clarify things. There's a line here, folks. So he's going to saturate it, and then he's going to do business here, okay? Verse 36, and it came to pass at the time of the offering, the evening sacrifice, Elijah, the prophet, came near, and he said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God of Israel. Verse 37, hear, O Lord, hear me, and this people may know that thou art the Lord God. See, this whole thing just didn't happen. He prayed. Verse 38, and fire, verse 38, and the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering. It happened. Now, what is he doing here? He is communicating the truth through visual demonstration. And then finally, there's a call to commitment, a call to embrace the truth and reject the lie. You see, look at verse 39. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. And we do know from following passages that they didn't really grasp it all the way, but at least they acknowledge it here. And Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon and slew them there. Killed all 400 of them. This was Old Testament, I understand that. We're not going to do that today, obviously. But this is an embracing of the truth in verse 39 and a rejection of the lie in verse 40. Now, I can't deal with all of this, but let's just talk about these 2 illustrations, confronting truth to power, okay? Okay. In 1776, I mentioned to you last week, okay, the colonists did not revolt against Parliament. They did not vote against the homeland. They revolted against who? The king. Because the king was doing things and manipulating things that were not consistent with the Constitution of England. He was violating existing law to inflict what he inflicted upon the people of the colonists. Now, all I'm saying to you is, that is why, you say, well, I still wouldn't do it. That's your choice, but I'm saying that's one of the reasons why many believers took up on that, okay? That was one of the reasons, not all the reasons. There are other reasons, any kind of conflict in world history, even the one now with Russia and all that, it's always multifaceted. It's never as simple as just the slaves. It's never as simple as just state rights. It's never as simple as just any one thing, okay? If you study history, you know that. It's always multifaceted, okay? But the way a lot of the Christians worked their way through, as I understand in my reading, they worked through the Revolutionary War issue was they felt that the truth, which was how the government was supposed to function, was not being honored, and because it was being dishonored, they had to make that choice. Now you say, I don't agree with that. That's fine, but that was some of the thinking at the time. Okay. Now Bonhoeffer is a different situation. If you don't know Bonhoeffer, he was involved with trying to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Okay. Now, Adolf Hitler, of course, was violating he was given sort of the keys to the kingdom by a parliament that just dissolved themselves and gave him all the power. So they just gave him power. That was true. But the killing and the destruction of innocent people, like he was doing, a lot of the Christians, and if you read Bonhoeffer's book, you'll find it was a struggle for him. It wasn't a simple, well, let's just kill him. Let's just kill him. It wasn't a simple decision. That's why I said it's not easy. You have to work it through in your mind and let God lead you. And if you read Bonhoeffer's book about him, you'll find out he evolved in understanding, because also you have to understand something too, that looking back at World War II, we have a more holistic view of all that was happening. But when you were in the midst of World War II, you only had your bit of world and whatever knowledge you had about what was going on at the time. Okay? Now, why do I bring those two illustrations up? So I think in both cases, there was a good case to be made for the courses that were taken. But I only got like 2 minutes, but I want to draw it to your life, because most of us, hopefully, are not going to have to worry about assassinating somebody. Hopefully we won't do that. We shouldn't do that, okay, in our situation right here. But, and hopefully there'll be no revolution, okay? But where you and I have to work it out is, how do we respond to the authority in our lives, right? That's our challenge, okay? So we're going to go back. I'm going to go take you back just for a year and a half ago, when the governor says, okay, the governor says, churches can't meet, okay? And we, along with other churches, says, well, you don't have the authority to say that. So he overstepped his boundaries. He took upon him authority he did not have. Okay, and the courts vindicated us. Now, I understand this. Again, it's all, I wish courts were not political, but you and I both know it's all political. Okay, courts are political, it is. But the courts did, at least in North Carolina, rule in our favor. In California, many of you know the story about John MacArthur, and they won their suit against the city of LA because they tried to penalize them enormously for meeting, okay? So you say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, that's your choice, okay? But I'm just saying that that's why people did what we did. Not trying to be, because we felt like that we had the Constitution on our side, and that trumps, no pun intended, okay? It trumps the actions of people. And if you're in the military, you know this. If you know people in the military, that people in the military are not to obey orders regardless of the order, right? If it's an illegal order, I'm not supposed to do it. In fact, that's one of the reasons why a number of people were executed after World War II, because their defense was, we were just following orders. But when you're following orders at the death camp, that doesn't fly, okay? Because of basic principles of justice and righteousness. So what I want to encourage you about is this. You've got to do a couple of things. You've got to make sure that you've thought the thing through, you've prayed the thing through. You've got to make sure that you have a biblical reason for taking your stand, and then you have to be willing to accept the consequences, okay? You have to be willing to accept the consequences, okay? So, for example, if I'm told that I have to I've got to lie and say to Johnny, hello, Sally, and say, refer to her, to the other students in the class, well, she's going to go over here. Well, I got to work that through my own mind and heart. Can I say that? Can I lie in class? Can I do that? Can I say that that's not actually true? Right? I mean, you got to make your own decision on that. Nobody can make that for you. Okay? And the same thing at your workplace. You work someplace, and they say you got to do X. And a lot of times now, with all the sensitivity training and all of that, and accounting, you got to work that through it as let the Lord lead you through that. Okay? Always being kind, always being gracious, but always being clear. Whether the authority over you or around you, wherever they're at, you got to make sure you're standing in the place of righteousness. Okay?